Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so Zohran Mamdani went on Andrew Schulz's podcast called Flagrant. It's the one where he sits there with a few of his buddies, and they all kind of laugh like hyenas at each other's jokes and hype each other up. And Schulz has been having more politicians on this show for interviews as a way to kind of make it more relevant. And it's worked because he built an audience doing, like comedy clips and crowd work and stuff like that, which a lot of the bigger comics of the moment have done. But he didn't really peek through in relevance until he started talking to people like Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, even Pete Buttigieg and Ezra Klein, and now he has had Zohran Mamdani on, and they had a pretty good conversation here. It's the usual style that comes with these podcasts, where it's a very light, breezy interview, although I will give Schulz some credit on this, that he seems to take an interest in these subjects, and even talking to Ezra Klein, he's curious about the details of these policies, whether that's because he feels guilty for promoting Trump or feels dumb for not knowing enough about the subject to not promote Trump. I do think the platform is a decent way to interview somebody when you ask them good questions. And this interview is full of good questions. Andrew asks detailed questions, as well as they are trying to get a sense of what I think is one of the most important things, which is how is the dynamic of power going to work once he is the mayor, right? He wants to do all these things to make things more affordable, but a lot of it has to do with like intricate balances of how the economy works and how incentive structures work. And it's possible to make those things better. How do you do it? They asked him some interesting questions here, and I think maybe even got some interesting concessions out of Andrew Schulz, although like all these podcast guys, he seems to kind of mirror the beliefs of whoever he's talking to. So here's what the conversation was like on Flagrant.
Hochul needs re-election, and it's next year, right? I imagine she is thinking, okay, if I raise taxes like you would want, I might lose some of my constituents. But she's also probably thinking, if this guy is such a tsunami and if I rebuke him, I could also lose people. Mm-hmm. So is your strategy to have so much support in a Trump-esque version? Like, he's the only other example I can see that has like found a way to completely transform his party. Is your strategy get so much support that Hochul's political future is dependent on her connectivity to you?
My strategy is to build the political will such that Governor Hochul has a partner in delivering universal child care.
He's a good man. He's a
politician.
politician.
Look. Governor Hochul has spoken.
Bend the knee.
Governor Hochul has said she wants to deliver universal child care. What she's had in the mayor we have right now is someone more focused on getting out of jail. It's what are you using your political capital for? Because the same people who will say, oh, we can't afford free buses. We can't afford $700 million a year in making the slowest buses in America fast and free.
I don't agree with that. I think you can. Like that. No. Like, but here's the thing. Like,
can I put that on the website?
You can put whatever you want. Yeah. Like, I also think this idea that like New Yorkers are going to flee because of a 2% increase. It's like, I've been everywhere else. You're not going anywhere. Bill Ackman's not going nowhere. He's going to be in the Hamptons all fucking summer.
There's only one place to write those tweets.
That's it.
New York City.
How do we get those 200,000 units out? Because the real only thing that's going to solve this crisis, and it's a legitimate crisis, is more units. You can freeze rent, you can do all these things.
You have to do it with more.
And some people, and I'm sure you would probably acknowledge this, that like even freezing rent within the controllable units that you have could cause like a surplus pressure in the non-controlled units, and those might go up. So while we protect those 50%, the other people who are making the same amount of money as them, because of those market pressures, could have increased rent.
Corporations are going to make their money.
And that's why you have to take this as an opportunity to also tackle the costs that landlords are facing. Because when I speak to landlords,
talk to me about that. That's interesting.
I hear that the insurance of affordable housing units has doubled in the last few years. right? And that cost is one that is driving so much of the pressure.
That's interesting.
And there's a number of those landlords that came together to create a different risk pool through something called Milford Street Captive. And they've managed to depress that cost. What if the city invested in that kind of a mechanism to help those landlords address?
You. I genuinely think you believe this stuff. I don't think you're somebody who's like selling a dream that you don't believe in. And I don't think it's possible to communicate in the way that you've communicated and like touch people
without authenticity.
Without the authenticity. But like, I'm worried about entrenched politics.
Yeah.
And I'm worried about the people that fund them, because they're the same people that have been fundraising against you.
No.
Okay. And I'm worried about them bending to their whim. And what scares me a little bit is there are going to be people that are incentivized for you to fail. And then if that pendulum swings all the way the other way, how many more people get hurt? And I guess my question is like, do you ever worry about that, or do you have to be so blinders on that you're going to win? Like, I love this city more than anything, and it is something I consider. Like, what if we get the complete opposite of you that has like no care about the tenants, no care about what people are paying rent? Some guy who comes in and just goes, "Hey, this is a free market. Welcome to New York. It's capitalism."
You're talking about Andrew Cuomo.
But like,
Right?
I think it can be crazier than that.
No, and I think my point here is that there is going to be immense opposition. There are incredible incentives to fight our agenda. What gives me hope is that the billionaires spending millions against me right now, they're not doing so because they're afraid my plans won't work. They're doing so because they're afraid that they will. If you look at the actual studies of free buses, it costs $700 million. It generates more than double that in economic benefit.
Put a bus on Second Avenue.
You're a one-issue voter. I was asking myself, who is Curtis Lewa talking to? I'm not extending the Second Avenue subway, and it's this guy.
Curtis, I love you, baby. I love you, comrade.
It's Mr. Housing is a human right, but I don't want trains to 125th Street.
Well, here's what
I do feel like it's a human right housing. I knew. I knew.
To my left, Andrew Schulz.
Literally,
We got it, boys. We did it.
Not a human right in terms. Well, yeah. Like, I don't think anybody should get a house. I do feel that way.
Yes. You got the mission accomplished, man.
All right, so Zohran's on the final stretch of his run here. The general election is in 2 weeks. Cuomo is still very far behind, but picking up a little bit of percentage points. Also, Curtis Lewa has picked up some momentum. As of right now, those two are still kind of splitting the opposition to Zohran, which puts him in a better position. It's possible that Curtis Lewa could back out last minute, but it doesn't really seem like he has any intentions to. And actually, the way the most recent debate that happened today was set up, Curtis Lewa was kind of coming away looking like, I'm the populist hero or whatever. And they kind of seemed to stack the deck like that. The audience, I don't know what was up with the audience, but they kept cheering and clapping for Lewa and for Cuomo, but not for Zohran. And I'm like, what crowd of people is this? He got a few applause breaks, and overall he performed very well in the debates, just as well as in the previous ones. But the reason he's going on Flagrant right now, and the reason I think it's a good idea, is that this is a New York podcast. They probably have a huge New York audience, and in talking about it, they get pretty into the details of New York policy. So I appreciated that, and I appreciated that there's some genuine curiosity from Schulz about how does a politician like Zohran offset some of the incentives that have caused the cost of living crisis, the housing crisis, that are not just as simple as one guy somewhere saying, I want to jack the prices up, but rather sort of incentive structures that have either been set up on purpose or on unintentionally, that make it easier for people to gouge and ultimately price people out. I don't know if Andrew Schulz owns property or not, or what exactly his stance on that is, but like you said, he thinks housing is a human right. And he also said that he supports Zohran because he believes in making things more affordable for New Yorkers, and that he's passionate about that. So I appreciate that about him. And it's good to host this more populist message. The thing that they keep saying to him is that, this is a test case for the rest of the country in terms of how this type of policy is going to work. And they're right about that. And it's also true that a lot of this policy is not necessarily new to the state of New York, didn't necessarily transform the city of New York. And so Zohran is hammering home the point here of of doing all of these things at once and trying to address all of these problems at once. And so that's very ambitious of him, potentially naive of him. But it seems like the approach that he wants to do is to roll up his sleeves and get in there and try to address every single issue somehow. And it seems like the way he wants to do it, or the way that would make the most sense for him to do it, as I see it, is to have an enormous amount of political pressure on his side. He was asked recently if he's going to be attending protests while he's the mayor, and he said that he plans to do the work of the mayor when he's mayor and not be protesting. Not sure exactly what that means. I think that having that sort of grassroots mobilization and organizing aspect to your political project is going to be essential to getting this stuff done. And I think Schulz kind of hits it on the head when he says that Kathy Hochul needs to feel like her re-election is dependent on how favorably she's viewed by the Zohran coalition. That is how you play politics. And aiming to reorganize the political situation so that she all of a sudden, instead of feeling pressure to moderate Zohran's agenda, she's feeling pressure to get it through somehow. And, you know, all of that is going to be a messy process. And so I think this interview served as a good, you know, voice and answer to people who might be sort of on board with Zohran, but aren't exactly sure how a lot of this will work. And Zohran's ability to deliver not just, you know, a win here or there or some better policy here or there that people will feel in a few years, but really a structural transformation. That's what he's aiming for. Not on every single issue, but on certain issues, he's talking about structural transformation. And he's correct that starting to see not just a few policy wins, but things happening structurally that make life easier for people. If people see that happening in New York, it's going to open their imagination. And I think a big problem with where we're at politically is that people have internalized this anti-establishment concept and the idea that, you know, the entrenchment of power, corporate power, or however high up they want to go on the conspiracy totem pole, that basically is what controls our politics. And so any politician who breaks through that is a more positive thing. And that's how we ended up in this weird moment of America where a lot of people seem to have voted for Trump without really being that interested in like backing up most of what Trump is doing. Or said he was going to be doing before he got elected. There's a lot of people that just voted for him because, once again, just like in 2016, they preferred that energy that they perceived from Trump. And I'm not even necessarily ascribing that to Schulz, because I think that he as a public figure should have been a lot more responsible in just being ignorant about that. And I think he could have asked Trump at least as many interesting questions as he asked Zohran. But in the case of Trump, you got to ask him harder questions. He's going to get hostile with you quickly, and he's not going to know very detailed answers to the questions. So it's a different, I don't know, you got to be prepared for that. But more so, like, the audience of Andrew Schulz, the New Yorkers that Zohran famously talked to that voted for Trump and AOC or didn't vote at all because they're sick of the system that he kind of helped use to help shape his campaign message. Those are the type of people that don't have the imagination to understand how somebody who calls themselves a democratic socialist can institute policy that actually works and actually transform the system. But in New York, it could be the perfect balance of a very powerful city at a moment where there's a lot of attention on these ideas and a lot of political willpower to get certain things done. And, you know, this project of a more socialist version of New York could go a long way to, because, you know, as Zohran is using pilot programs from other states, New York could become the ultimate pilot program across the country. And I'm sure that's what he's aiming for. But it's going to take a relentlessness, not just on his part, but on the part of everyone who supports him too. And I've said this before, that like the coalition online that, you know, yaps about left-wing politics all day, including myself, one of the only areas that we seem to have any influence at all is to be able to make grassroots candidates like Zohran Mamdani more visible. And for him specifically, he did a lot of the work for himself. But I mean, across the country, you're seeing these grassroots campaigns sprout up that are partially fueled by people talking about them and making it seem more possible that they could win, and also, you know, sending money their way to make their campaigns more viable. And that can continue to happen through Zohran's mayorship. but he's going to have to be very diligent about leading that charge. So he's going to have to play politics at the same time that he's going on TV and fighting against Trump and dealing with political blows that come from that, while also imagining and articulating a version of politics where that sort of grassroots across the country style organizing can actually lead to targeted political wins. And that's very possible. It's definitely possible. So if putting that type of attention on these policies and pushing hard for the things that Zohran signals for people to push hard for, ideally, in my imagination, that's how this would go, is that Zohran targets attention on certain issues and gives people ways to push for those issues, to mount the political pressure and make it something that the people more powerful than him, or people that have the ability to release funds that he doesn't have, start to feel the pressure to get those things done. So speaking of New York, and even though this was a good interview and I'm glad they had Zohran Mamdani on to have this conversation, I think it'll make a positive impact. I do think it bears highlighting what exactly people like Andrew Schulz, Theo Vaughn, Joe Rogan have unleashed upon the American people and cities like New York, which Andrew Schulz claims to love, in their promotion of Donald Trump. Just to make it clear that these things are not neutral. Just because Andrew Schulz has, Zohran Mamdani on, Bernie Sanders on, that doesn't mean that it was okay that he had Trump on. Because there are implications to helping Donald Trump. There's implications to sitting next to him and talking to him without being willing to meaningfully challenge what he's saying he wants to do. Because now that he's in power, what he's doing is he's sending ICE agents into sovereign cities like New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles, and having them arrest anybody they can get their hands on before anybody in the state is able to stop them. So these are illegal operations that are happening, and ICE was doing an operation on Canal Street in New York, which is famous for vendors and people selling different types of items, some of them counterfeit, whatever, who cares. It's a vendor street. ICE showed up there, arrested some people, and then there was a quick community response that chased them out. Huge community response in New York. And in the process of this raid, they arrested 4 U.S. citizens who have now been released. They apparently were released 30 minutes after a press conference was announced by a congressperson in New York. They were held for about 24 hours without being able to contact anybody. Their parents filed missing persons reports about them. These are U.S. citizens. They didn't have any contact, so ICE arrested them for 24 hours and didn't have to contact anybody to tell them where they're at. This is illegal. This is straight up illegal shit. And it was very obvious when Trump was running for office that this is what he was going to do. If you bought his line of bullshit that, mass deportations and the type of crackdowns that he wanted to do on immigrants would not include this type of federal police work, then you are a mark. And luckily, New York is a place where there's enough population density that they can't just roll up in certain places and arrest people like this undisturbed and uninterrupted. And even in Chicago, they're facing more and more resistance. The resistance to this is mounting, and it's going to continue mounting because they're going to keep doing it. But as the government shutdown continues, some of these people, I don't know which of these employees are getting paid and which ones aren't, but definitely it's going to start cutting into their paychecks. It's going to start cutting into their morale. That's just how these things work. And it's probably true that a lot of these soldiers that are rolling tanks out onto these streets are not getting paid, or don't know when they're getting paid, or something weird is up with their paycheck and they're waiting to hear back about it. And that's only going to continue. So Democrats right now have a moral obligation to keep this shutdown going. And I know that some people are being hurt by that and are feeling the pressure of that, but the reality is those people are being used as leverage by Donald Trump already. He's going to do that anyway. So it's better for him to burn out that leverage that he has now so that we can move through this process, because the longer he's able to hold out on this leverage, the bigger of a win he's going to be able to gamble on. And this shutdown gets in the way of his ability to do that. And it is going to get in the way of these ICE raids and different types of federal operations that they want to do. As much as they don't want to admit it, the shutdown is getting in the way, and that's why it's a good thing. Pressure getting pressed, do you feel it now? What even happens next, I don't really know. Voice carries less, can you hear me now? Soon as I get blessed, time's running out. Pressure getting pressed. Pressure getting pressed. Feel the pressure getting pressed. Yeah. Pressure, do you feel it now? I'm just saying this.